I'm going to talk about cybercrime, and my main aim will be to convince you that the sort of image, the quaint image of the hacker, which you probably know is already dead. I really want to sort of hammer that message home. You know, the idea, if you think about that lovely 1986 film War Games, if you've seen that, where Matthew Broderick plays a sort of precocious teenage hacker who gets into the Department of Defense Systems and almost triggers World War III, and it's all just kind of good fun that goes a bit wrong. Those days are long gone, and cybercrime is now a very mature and for some people very lucrative industry. It's an industry that is sort of mature enough to attract the attention of professional economists. It's an industry that has matured enough to have different subsectors that work together, and as I said, to make a lot of money. And ultimately, it's an industry that we all pay for. So I'm going to try and make that point just by talking you through three different pieces that I've been involved in writing about cybercrime. And they illustrate what I think are sort of different levels in the cybercrime hierarchy. And I'll try and draw an analogy with real-world crime. So we're sort of starting at the street and working up to the level of organised or corporate crime. I'm a freelance journalist. All these pieces were for New Scientist, I do most of my work for New Scientist. I'm not a computer scientist, so you know, I want to say interrupt me at any point if you think I've said something stupid or that's wrong. Technical questions I may struggle with, you know, because that's not my background. But I'll do my best, and please interrupt me, like I say. Stick your hand up, shout out if you want to ask any questions. I'll try and leave some time at the end as well. So the first piece I want to talk about is, as I said, what I see as the kind of street level crime of the internet. And one of the most exciting things you can do as a reporter is to write about crime, because basically, if you get it right, you're doing some good. You're exposing this wrongdoing. And the difficulty of writing about regular crime is the very obvious point that criminals don't want to tell you what they're doing. You don't walk into a bar and hear two guys sitting there talking about a bank robbery that they're planning next week. Those discussions obviously happen in secret. And one of the curious things about cybercrime is that that's not the case. Discussions about cybercrime very often happen kind of in public. Not in a place where you're just going to like end up through some random surfing, but nevertheless a chat room that you can access is not password protected. If you know where it is, you can go there and you can hear criminals talking about what they're going to do and you know, what they're buying and selling. So the first piece is where I went to is a story about going to one of these chat rooms. This is what they look like. It's an IRC chat. You're probably familiar with these. This isn't the one I visited. I'm sorry, I wish I had a screenshot from it. But I just want to show you, roughly what they look like. Usernames, messages, these are all the people that are in the room. And so the chat rooms that I went to, they're hard to find if you don't know what you're doing. And when you get there, they're hard to understand unless you've been there before. So I had two guides, which I have to say thank you to now, Steve Santorelli and Levi Gundert from Team Cymru, which is a computer security organisation. Steve and Levi are both former law enforcement agents who have gone into sort of cyber security. And one of the things they do is hang out in these chat rooms and sort of, they have personas where they basically infiltrate these chat rooms by pretending to be criminals, and that's allowed them to understand what's bought and sold in these chat rooms. So they took me to one, and I'm just going to show you a few of the messages that I saw and talk you through what the messages mean. Now, when you get in there, it's utterly bewildering because this stuff is streaming through quicker than you can possibly read it. There are so many messages being posted, and they don't make a lot of sense. So here's one from a user called Cinch. And Cinch says, I got fresh hacked UK CVV2s. So in the real world, CVV2 is that 3-digit number on the back of your credit card, the thing on the signature strip. In these chat rooms, it's actually sort of shorthand for that 3-digit number plus the long number on the front of your credit card, plus the name of the person whose card it is, plus their address. And that is all the information that you need to go to somewhere like Amazon or many other online retailers and make a purchase. And so Cinch is basically saying, buy this, and you can go to Amazon with this information, you can start buying stuff. CVV2s typically go for, they can be less than $1 each and up to like maybe $10 each. It depends what the limit on the card is. And one of the ways, there's many ways of getting them, but a very common way is to hack into the payment processing parts of online retail websites. So I'm not talking like Amazon, places like that, which is going to be extremely well protected, but usually smaller operations where they're not employing the latest security software. You break into the website and you find all the customers' details there. You go into a chat room like this and you sell them. It's not just small websites, though. There was, I think it was late 2008, someone hacked into Heartland Payment Processors, which is an enormous sort of intermediary in the online retail business, which processes payments from many, many different sites. So someone actually hacked into their computer and stole millions of details on individual purchases. And when I was looking, the price of CVV2s was really low, and that may have been one reason, because the market had just been flooded with the proceeds of this Heartland breach. So let me just show you another message. So Loops is saying, sort of obvious point as well, so UK just means these are UK credit cards we're talking about here, and hackers want credit cards from around the world. So Loops has got UK and US card details, and talking about dumps, track 1 and track 2. So a dump is basically the information that's on your credit card, but which you can't see. So it's the stuff that's on the magnetic strip, and I think that's track 1, but I sometimes get them mixed up. Or the stuff that's encoded in the little chip on the front of newer cards, and that's track 2. Now, if you have this information, you can sort of go a step further. You have all the information you need to clone a credit card. You need to buy a device that can create cloned credit cards, but they're available for between $10,000 and $30,000, which, considering the proceeds you can make from them, is not a massive investment. So if you buy this information and you have a cloning machine, you can start printing credit cards. And then you can go to real-world stores and make purchases with them. And that's very attractive to some criminals, because the problem about buying from online retailers is that you need somewhere for the goods to be sent. And that causes a problem, because if at some point in that process the credit card is identified as a stolen one, then that gives law enforcement somewhere to turn up, and you're going to be there waiting to receive the goods. It's actually, many criminals prefer to actually have a real card, go into a store, because if you can move quick enough, if you steal the details, clone the cards, go to the store, you're much more likely to have a window of maybe like a day where you can really just sort of max out that card, buy as much stuff as possible. If you do it in disguise, there's I wouldn't say little chance of getting caught, but you have a reasonable chance of getting away with it. So dumps are more expensive. I actually sent, when I was in the chat room, I sent Luke a personal message saying, okay, I want 15 of these things. And I think he was asking about 10, or he or she was asking about $10 each. And where do you get dumps from? They're more difficult to obtain. You need some way of intercepting the information that is transmitted when you make a purchase. So if you imagine you go into a store and you swipe your card and that stuff goes off to a payment processor, you need some way of intercepting that information. But there are various people who have contacts, criminals who have contacts in stores, who are willing to deploy a device on the sort of store's payment processing system, which will intercept that information and send it back to sellers. So let me just show you one more thing. This is someone called Netta. Oh, and I should just say, so the guys from Team Cymru were reluctant to take me into the chat rooms where the bigger players operated, because those are, for them, the sort of high-value worlds where they've infiltrated and where they're really learning about how stuff goes on. So where they took me to was really where sort of kind of petty criminals hang out. And in that kind of world, a lot of people are trying to rip you off. And Stephen Levi thought that anyone that purchased from Cinch or Loops would probably just be sold stolen credit card details that have been stolen months ago, and the cards have been deactivated, because the chat room is full of criminals that are trying to rip off criminals, basically. But if we just go back, oops, It's not that important. If you remember the chat room screen I showed you at the beginning, and it had some usernames on the right-hand side, tells you everyone is in the room. And some of the usernames had coloured dots next to them. So that's a kind of rating system. It tells you, is this person an admin, or have they been has an admin verified their status as a trusted participant? Or if there's no colour next to your name, you could just be anyone. So Levi and Steve said, well, why don't you start looking at someone who is an admin or a trusted person, because they've earned that status by being involved in deals where both sides have said, this was legit. So Nettery is one of these people. He was an admin in the room. And he's selling this complicated list of things. The key thing here really is fools. There in the middle of it. This is basically what we talk about as identity theft. So what he's selling is the CVV2 information, the dumps, plus social security number for the person that owns the card, mother's maiden name for that person, and the date of birth. So this is enough information to go away and do things like open bank accounts and apply for loans. So it allows you to sort of really ramp things up to a whole new level of theft. And Netta probably obtained this information by phishing. So you've all heard about these scams where you think you're going to your bank's website, but actually you're redirected to a site that looks exactly like that, but it was operated by a hacker who then siphons off your information, sells it to someone like Netta, who sells it on. And then if you move quickly enough, you can get out a loan, move that loan to a safe account, and by the time you've been caught, the loan is in an account, which is in another country, and it's your money. So this is kind of scary stuff, and you can see that it's reflected in the price. So $8 per set of information Meta's asking for. So this, like I said, this is kind of petty crime in the sense that we can't trust a lot of these people. There's lots of scams going on. But if you take a sort of step back and look at all of these chat rooms, we know there's a lot of serious crime going on and a lot of money being made. So there's a guy called Thorsten Holtz at the University of Mannheim, and he looked at some scams that involved keylogging. So this is one way in which the people in those chat rooms would be able to obtain the information that they were selling. So you probably all know what a keylogger is. It's a bit of software which is surreptitiously installed on your computer. It sort of sits there and waits till you do something interesting, like you go to your online bank. And then it starts recording everything you type in. And it sends that information to some kind of drop zone which a malicious hacker can access and then sell. So that's another route by which information ends up in chat rooms. So what Thorsten did was he found some of these drop zones. He collected a whole bunch of keylogging software and he looked at the places where they were sending it. He found 240 servers that were serving as drop zones for this information, and he sort of systematically looked inside 70. In them he found almost 6,000 eBay accounts, so that would have allowed people to log on and start buying stuff in using someone else's eBay account. He found login details for over 10,000 bank accounts, almost 6,000 credit card numbers. And if you try and sort of put a price on, well, you can kind of say, what's the average theft that we see from a stolen credit card? Then you can sort of turn all that into a total number. And he reckoned he saw basically information that would have been worth $16 million. So that's a lot of money, but bear in mind he only looked at 70 out of the 240, and that's just keyloggers. That's just one way in which people can extract important information. So that gives us, that's one sort of figure for how much it's being traded. I'm just going to show you one more. This is a guy called Vern Paxson. He's at that institute's over in Berkeley. And he monitored chat room trading. So that was exactly the kind of place where I was. He looked at lots of these different chat rooms during 2006 and tried to sort of quantify what was being exchanged there. So he recorded 13 million different messages sent by 100,000, people using 100,000 different usernames. Of course, that doesn't mean there's 100,000 different people. They're very likely people have multiple identities. A of the social security numbers, he found 4,000 that were valid. So he actually checked those. So we know that they were valid and not fake. Over 400 new credit card numbers were posted every day. And the total trades using sort of similar methodology to what Forstern did, he put a figure on 93 million. So, and you will definitely see higher numbers quoted. If you look at the security reports coming from security companies like Symantec, you'll often see numbers that are in the hundreds of millions. The truth is that no one knows. But I think these two studies are interesting in that they're both systematic and they're reasonable ballpark numbers. So, I mean, if you were talking about tens of millions per year, I think that would be sort of an uncontroversial number. We're definitely in that range. So as I said, I kind of view this as street-level crime because these are the people at the bottom of the chain. They're the ones who, the information having been stolen by someone else, is passed on to these sort of, the equivalent of a drug dealer on the street, basically, the last person in this chain of command. So I want to sort of take a step up the hierarchy now and look at some more, slightly more professional crime. And I want to do that by telling the story of Conficker. And the way I want to try and tell this story is just to talk you through a kind of game of cat and mouse that emerged after Conficker was released. So Conficker is a computer worm. It appeared in November 2006. And what followed was a kind of fight between a group of computer scientists and security professionals who formed something called the Conficker Working Group, and the creators of Conficker, who have never been identified. And I think if we run through this story, what's interesting about it is you realise how smart the people behind Conficker really were, which gives us an indication that it isn't, this world of crime isn't just these guys in chat rooms trying to make a fast buck. There's some really, really smart people in there who are operating at a level above them. So, Conficker appeared November 2006. Less than a month before, Microsoft had rushed out this patch for a vulnerability in Windows. It may be that the people saw that patch was released, realised that people don't patch their machines, or there's always a time lag. So they wrote some code to exploit that patch. So Conficker, the version 1, did a couple of things. And these version names, by the way, if you know about Conficker, they used, the Conficker Working Group used a different terminology. I'm just calling them versions 1 to 4 because it's simpler. So it did a couple of things that are fairly common, but I think are still smart. So first of all, if the worm made it onto your machine, it patched the vulnerability behind it. So someone said to me, well, this is like a burglar in a real world. You break into a house, you close the window behind you. You don't want anyone else to get in. And then what it did every day, so the first version didn't come with any capability of doing anything. It couldn't be monetized in any way. All it did was to try and connect with the people that created it. And every day it reached out to 250 random URLs. So these are, they weren't actually random, but they look random. So strings of letters and numbers that were generated by an encrypted algorithm. So there was no way of knowing in the next day where it was going to move out to. Now, okay, so I'll just quickly finish off on version 1. Couldn't remember what was on that slide. So version 1 reached out to these URLs, and there's no way of knowing where it's going to go. So in a sense, there's no way of stopping it. It's always going to be able to get back to its creators, because its creators, who wrote the algorithm, they know where it's going to talk to, which of the 250 it's going to go to the next day. So one of the first things that the Conficker Working Group did was to reverse engineer that algorithm, which took them, I think, about a month. So after about a month, they were able to reverse engineer that algorithm. They knew everywhere that it would be going on subsequent days, which URLs it would be talking to, and they basically bought all of those. So that there was no way in which, if any of the hackers tried to register a URL and put an updated version of Conficker there, well, they wouldn't be able to. The domain wouldn't be available. So that's kind of an impressive feat. But of course, it didn't stop the people behind Conficker. Well, they said, okay, you've shut off that lifeline, but we know that most people don't patch their machines. So we're just going to release another version that exploits the same vulnerability. We're going to forget these URLs. We're just going to pump out a new version. And the new version had some tweaks to it. One of the things it did was if you put a USB into an infected machine, Configure would jump onto that, a thumb drive. It would jump onto the thumb drive, and when you connected to a subsequent machine, it would jump off and infect that machine. And what that allowed it to do was to get into networks that were patched. So if you work for a big company that successfully sort of shut off the outer walls of its network against Configure, and you brought a thumb drive in from an infected machine, then bang, it's inside the network, and it was able to spread inside networks. And it's really incredible. It's still on those networks today. It's amazing how bad big companies are, including sort of well-known computer and computer security companies, still can't remove these infections from the networks. One thing which I think shows us just how smart these people are is that the encryption which version 2 used was based on a new encryption algorithm developed at MIT that had been released just 3 months earlier. And this was like the kind of thing that really, unless you were involved in the computer science or encryption community, academic community, you would never have heard of. So these people are watching what academia is doing, and they're using the latest fruits of this research to make their worm more resilient. It also blocked access to the Microsoft patch. So if you realized you were infected and you tried to go to the Microsoft website, the URL that contained the patch, Configure stopped you going there. So you would just get a site not found message. Now, what happened next isn't completely clear, because Configure 2 was still having to reach out to these 250 domains to talk to its creators. So in a sense, it shouldn't have been able to get an update, because those should have been blocked off. The algorithm had been reverse engineered. And I never really got to the bottom of this when I was reporting it, but something went wrong, something that the Configure working group wouldn't discuss. And one of the domains that they should have secured, they didn't. And of course, it only takes one. So on one day, Configure reached out to a domain, found that it was actually had been bought by the creators of Configure, and it found an update waiting for it there. And so all of the versions of Configure 2 that were able to get there were updated to Configure version 3. Now, Configure version 3, clearly they'd realized that there was a problem with the algorithm they were using. So they came out with a different system. Rather than randomly generating URLs every day, it came hard-coded with a list of 50,000 URLs. And every day it chose 500 from them. And basically what the creators are doing here is they're saying, okay, maybe you can block out 250 URLs a day. There's no way you can take out 50,000. Not only would that be too expensive, because who's going to pay for it? I mean, the ones that they booked before were paid for, in some cases, by people's own money. There was no sort of system for funding this, so they had to find money where they could. There's no way they could take out 50,000. What's more, those 50,000, the first set of URLs were all things like .com and .net. The second lot included country-level domains, like .kz for Kazakhstan. And what they knew was that the people that operate these country, well, some of these country-level domains, there's just the communication between them and the rest of the world is pretty poor. You can't contact all of these operators, communicate the problem, and get them to remove all these URLs. They knew that some of them would be left open, and they were right. So what they did at this point was to sort of, it just sparked this crazy rush where they were like, well, we've got to somehow take out 50,000 domain names in obscure parts of the world. So they were kind of working round the clock to do what they could. They contacted the people that operate these domains and said, look, you've got to take this stuff out. And in many cases, they were successful. It was an enormous job. It included 116 different top-level domains. But the crazy thing about this whole business is that it was a red herring. Configure never reached out to any of those URLs. the version 3 had peer-to-peer capability built in instead. And when they had an update, they released it via peer-to-peer, and it spread. Well, you just got to get it to a few instances of Conficker, and then it spreads to the rest via peer-to-peer. So the whole thing was basically misdirection. They said to the Conficker working group, here's an enormous challenge, you go solve it. Meanwhile, we're working on something completely different. And they did that very successfully. And again, I think that's just another thing that makes you think, you know, they obviously were really plugged into this effort to combat them, to the extent that they were kind of fighting it and almost taunting the working group. So version 4, which came out via peer-to-peer, was the first version where we actually got some hint at how Conficker was trying to make money. So all the other versions just sat there on the infected machine and didn't really do anything. Version 4 came with WallDAC, which is a bot that sends spam. Lots of money to be made in. I don't have slides on it now, but if you're interested in the profits from spam, check out a paper called Spamalytics by Vern Paxson, who I mentioned earlier, which sort of gets into the economics of spam campaigns. And again, he reckons that individual campaigns can generate millions of dollars. It also had something called Spyware Doctor 2009, which is basically a fake antivirus. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And Conficker, by this point, essentially had beaten the working group. I mean, it was out there, it was infected probably hundreds of thousands of machines. Don't ever believe those numbers about, you know, a bot of this size. No one really knows how big a botnet is. But, you know, it's probably safe to say that hundreds of thousands of machines were infected. Once you've got a network like that and it's fairly stable and you don't think it's going to disappear, you can start renting it out to people that want to send spam or spread fake software or do whatever. And Conficker, as far as I'm aware, I think it's much smaller now, but I don't think it's been eliminated. And it doesn't matter, because there's so many other botnets out there that are huge and very resilient. So that's professional crime. I just want to sort of move up to a final level in the cybercrime hierarchy and talk about what we could call organized or corporate crime. And this is a story of a company that sold those fake antivirus things like Spyware Doctor. And sort of my guide this time was a guy called Dirk Kohlberg at McAfee. So Dirk's a security researcher, and one of the things he's interested in is vulnerabilities in Flash. And there is a vulnerability in Flash now patched that allows someone that serves up a Flash banner advert to trigger the creation of a pop-up screen on your machine. So you go to a website, you see one of those like animated ads, and somehow the provider of that ad is able to also show you a pop-up screen. So Dirk was looking at this vulnerability, and he realized that some of these ads were serving pop-up screens that looked pretty scary. They showed you messages that looked like this. This is lots of them all together. Basically, the pop-up screens made it look like a virus, some kind of security scan, or some kind of error process had been triggered on your machine. They were designed to look like, I mean, you probably recognize some of these, I can't remember which is which, but they were designed to look like legit security products. And they said things like, we scanned your computer and we found like 25 Trojans or whatever. Or they said other stuff like, someone has been using this machine to visit pornographic websites. You need to clean it up. And they look very realistic. And of course, most people had no way of knowing that it was the advert that triggered the scan. They thought a scan was going on, and they thought they needed to fix this problem. And if you click remove all threats now, what happens is you get taken to a website which offers to sell you security software that will clean up that threat. Now, of course, there is no threat. These are just Flash animations that say the same thing every time on every computer. And the software, if you choose to buy it to clean up the threat that doesn't exist, doesn't work. So you've been fooled into buying a useless product. And you typically pay around $40 to do that. Now, I just can't remember what's next. Oh, yeah. So Dirk was kind of interested in this. And what typically happens if you can try and say, well, what server is sending this pop-up window? And you know how it is in terms of registering servers. It's pretty easy to obscure your tracks. So generally when Dirk investigated this stuff, he didn't get very far. He would trace it back to a server in Eastern Europe or China that was registered under a false name or under a proxy, and that's basically the end of it usually. That was not the case here. He found that the server was registered to a company called Innovative Marketing in the Ukraine. And he started digging around, and he found that Innovative Marketing had a whole bunch of servers online which were not password protected. So that meant, quite legally, Dirk could go in and basically rummage around the servers. I mean, it's kind of ironic that these people made money by scaring people into thinking that they had insecure machines when they themselves had no security on their servers. And Dirk found a whole bunch of interesting stuff. And most security researchers at this point would expect that they might be about to infiltrate a small group of hackers. I mean, after all, they're just producing software that doesn't work. It doesn't seem that hard. But what he found was something completely different. He found a large, organized company that was behind this fraud. So here's an image he found on one of the servers. It's of, a very professional-looking lobby in an office somewhere. Here's some images he found posted by the employees of Innovative Marketing. They're on an away day. So kind of behaving like most big companies do, sending their employees off to have some fun because they've done well. So he started rooting through more servers, and he found a personal directory which had 650 names in it. Evidence of offices in lots of different countries. They had call centers in India and Poland. They had servers that operated these call centers. Dirk reckons that they received about 2 million calls in 2008. And you might wonder why a fraudulent company bothers operating a call center. But we were able to listen to some of the recordings, and it's pretty clear that what's happening is that people are phoning up because they're angry and they think they've been scammed. And what the operators, it's hard to know whether the operators know that there's a scam going on, but they've clearly been trained to sort of put these people off, to deter them from trying to get their money back or from making a formal complaint to some kind of consumer organisation. So they tell them things like, there's a bug, we'll send you another version, or you need to, really tragically, the thing they tell everyone is disable whatever security software you've got on. So they basically say, make your machine more vulnerable. And you can tell from listening to these calls as well that the people that phone up to complain are not experienced computer users, so they're quite likely to believe what they're told. And so that total profits number there, that incredibly precise figure, let me just tell you how that came about. So around the same time that Dirk was interested in this, the FTC started to get complaints. And they too, they found that these servers were open and they were able to trace back these complaints to Innovative Marketing. And they had a couple of lucky breaks. I mean, Innovative Marketing is a weird company in that there was an internal argument within the company and the directors ended up taking each other to court. So it shows you how confident that they were in terms of their operation. One of them filed suit, and then there was a counter-suit. And of course, everything this is in Canada, so all of those documents are in the public domain. So in a sense, you have these directors of a fraudulent company arguing with each other in the public domain. So the FTC were able to get those court records. They were able to identify who the main players were. Although the company was in the Ukraine, the main players were either US citizens or foreign citizens who were operating in the US. So they were able to identify them. Some of them have been successfully prosecuted. Two of the main players have fled the country, and one of them has disappeared completely. The other one I was able to track down to Sweden, but he wouldn't. He's obviously not going to take my calls. And both of those main players are essentially, the FTC has no idea where they are. We don't know what to do about them. So this incredibly precise number is there because the FTC found the company that processed the payments. The company, if you bought some of this stuff, the company that would handle the payments, And so that's the number they came up with, the total money that innovative marketing made during while it was in operation, which is roughly 2002 to 2008, I think. And although some people have been prosecuted, they weren't the main players. So we don't really expect any of this money to ever be, retrieved. Certainly no one's going to get a refund. So those are the kind of three levels that I wanted to talk to you about. I hope you can see sort of how mature this industry has become. And the whole issue of kind of what to do about this stuff is another talk in itself. But I'll just say one point, which every time I report on this, the same message comes back to me, and that's there's a real lack of collaboration amongst the groups that are concerned about this sort of crime. You have security companies who are paid to protect clients against the crime, not to root out the criminals and make sure they can't operate any longer. And those are two different things. So security companies know a lot about what's going on, and they do an amazing job, a lot of them. But it's not their job to go find the criminals. That's the job of law enforcement. And there are many contacts between law enforcement and security companies, but probably not enough. There's still a fear about the companies having proprietary information, and their first priority for that information is to their clients. It's not to law enforcement. And a bigger problem is collaboration between law enforcement in countries like the US, where this sort of crime is taken seriously, even though there's not enough money spent trying to track them down, but at least we take it seriously here. And law enforcement in places like China and Russia, where it's not really clear what the authorities think about law enforcement, but you'll hear time and time again that we'll identify something over here, we'll trace it back to a server in Russia. It's like, okay, we need someone to go and get that server and see the server logs so we can find out who's operating it. And that's where the case breaks down, because you don't have that level of collaboration. I think things are improving because we're just becoming more and more aware of this sort of crime, and more people have been fallen victims to this crime or know about it, and they're getting angry. So I feel like things are changing, but because we have this institutional problem of a lack of collaboration, that change is really slow. So thanks for listening, and those are my, feel free to email me if you've got any questions about this stuff. If you want to connect on Twitter, I do tweet infrequently, but it's usually about this kind of thing. And that's it. If you've got any questions, please fire away.
Been a bit of marketing, the main players to Sweden. How exactly did you track him down?
He was involved in lots of different scams, and one of the other scams he was involved in was what's the right way of putting it? It's like a cyber squatting. So he registered a URL that would I can't remember what it was. So there's a legitimate company that went to register a website in its name, and they found it was owned by someone else, this other person. People make a lot of money by doing that, because then when the legitimate company wants to get its website, wants to get the right URL, they can say, okay, I've got it, I'm going to sell it to you for lots of money. But there is a process for arbitrating those disputes, and that's a public process. So and that's how his name came out. Yeah.
So when criminals buy something on Amazon, where do they send it? I'm assuming they don't send it to their own home. How do they retrieve these items?
They don't send it to themselves. They usually send it. I mean, I guess some of them will send it. If you were confident that you were in a country where there weren't good links with law enforcement elsewhere, maybe you would get it sent to yourself. Usually what they do is use some kind of mule. So they'll pay another person to accept the goods on their behalf. And of course that person puts themselves at great risk. But what they rely on is that the process for tracking down this fraud is slow enough that you can bang out a couple of orders. By the time the stuff has arrived and been removed, the fraud doesn't get recognised until after that. And you can use things like, mailbox drops and stuff like that, which you register in a false name. As long as you get there and take it away in time, you're in the clear.
That was a very North American and Western European answer to your question. The simpler answer is that in many countries law enforcement is corrupt and they are in on this scam too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a really fascinating question, which I don't think anyone's got to the bottom of, which is if we just take Russia and China as examples, what is the real attitude of those countries to cybercrime? Because we hear complaints again and again that they won't cooperate with investigations. So why won't they cooperate? No one really knows, but one interesting theory is that the same people that are committing the crime in those countries are also willing to help the state out when it comes to some kind of cyber conflict. And so Russia is where we have the clearest evidence. There's been sort of, when there was conflict between Russia and Georgia and Russia and Estonia, like conflict, real-world conflict, there was also a cyber conflict that accompanied that, where Estonian and Georgian websites were taken offline. And there's some evidence to suggest that the people that were involved in that conflict are also the people that are making money from cybercrime. So it may be that the Russian government doesn't want to crack down on cyber criminals because it knows they're willing to help out the government, when needs be.
On a low-tech level, and to expand on or even contradict what George just said, my house was burglarized in San Francisco in 1975. A neighbor called the police, and the police dispatcher said, "We don't come out unless the owner calls." And so, big long story, but the police investigated and about a week later called and said, "Yeah, we know who these guys are. They're crooks, but they had fenced all the stuff they stole by the time we got to them. We had no case." So in many cases, I'm convinced that law enforcement doesn't even care.
Yeah, yeah. I think the mass of the sheer size of the kind of low-level stuff is so great. I mean, there's a scam at the moment going on with fake cashier's checks, and I know that some of the lawyers who were involved in tracking down the scammers, and they've got the scammers' bank account details, and they're talking to the FBI about it, but nothing seems to be getting done really. And I think it's just the sheer size of the problem. These law enforcement agents are working on so many things at once, they just don't have time.
What
would be the background for a law enforcement person that really deal with the more technical aspects of this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know actually. I mean, I don't know the people that are doing it now. I'm not sure. The next generation are probably going to be, you lot, if you want to, because the FBI, Department of Defense, they're all recruiting computer science experts in large numbers, as are many private firms.
Very quick comment on your configure 2 with the 250 domain names. I am also a member of that cabal group. And at that time we went to ICANN to ask for not having to pay for those domains.
Right.
So that was the way. It was difficult, but it was accomplishable, whereas 50,000.
Okay. You had to pay for some then, did you? Or did you get them?
Well, there were some that were paid, but
right.
Once we started, then we requested ICANN permission
right,
to register
okay.
them without having to pay
Realize
for them.
Right, okay. Okay.
You had UK versus US. US doesn't use chip cards, but UK does, right?
Yeah, I did. Are there some cards that have chips over here? I think there are.
Well, no, smart cards.
Yeah.
But it's not prevalent here.
I think it came into the UK. It's widespread in the UK, for sure. Yeah.